Windows files. In this nugget, we discuss Windows files, and we start off first of all by talking about how to navigate your way around the file system. I share with you some fundamental basics about the command prompt and how to make your way around the file system. It's a little bit primitive. Nowadays, we mostly use the mouse and Windows Explorer or My Computer, which are pretty close to the same thing. Then we also talk here about directory structures, where various types of files can be found. This can be important when it comes to troubleshooting things if you want to find certain files that users think might be missing. We also take a look here at offline files, and this is a great way to make sure that files are available for you that would normally be found on the network, but they're still available for you even when you're disconnected from the network. And then the volume shadow copy service is something that's very useful for backup processes and also for restoring files that may have been corrupt, overwritten, or deleted. As a grade schooler, I was fortunate enough to have parents that would take me and my sister skiing nearly every weekend when we lived in Colorado. I haven't skied that much in recent years, but I'm still pretty decent at it. And my son-in-law and my son said, "Hey, Dad, you know how to ski. Why don't you go snowboarding with us sometime?" I thought, well, that's fine. I've played the Xbox games where they snowboard, and it's not that hard. So I decided to rent a snowboard, get out there on the slopes, and show them how quickly I could master the sport of snowboarding. I think they maybe should change the name of snowboarding to face planting, because that's what I seem to have mastered all the way down those slopes. And I'm used to being pretty well respected as a decent skier going down the slopes and, zipping by everybody. But when it came to the snowboarding, boy, did I ever feel like a fool. Well, you know what? It's going to be similar to that if you're an A-plus technician and you're sitting there working on a user's computer and it looks like you don't know where you're going or what you're trying to do, or you don't seem to be able to navigate your way around the operating system. One of the most important parts of doing that is knowing and understanding how to work with the various directory structures that we have within Windows. And a big part of that is knowing the various directory structures from within Windows. You have to know where many of the commonly found types of files are located. So we'll talk to you about also navigating the file system using appropriate tools. Now, really it's mostly a matter of preference, but if I were to go into the Windows Vista operating system, and just about everything I'm going to show you here really applies across all editions of Windows, then I would go to maybe the command prompt here to launch the command prompt. So if I click on this, notice that it takes me right to C:\Windows and then System32. Now, first of all, this is seldom, if ever, where I want to be. I usually actually like to start in the root of C and then navigate to wherever else it is that I want to go. So let me, first of all, show you a couple of tricks that you can do with that command prompt shortcut that might make your life a little bit easier if you use it quite a lot, like I do. So if I go to the shortcut here for command prompt and choose Properties, notice that it takes me to %home drive, %home path. That's why it takes me to the system root, which is Windows, and then System32. I almost always just want to start on the C drive. Okay, so that's normally where I'll go. You can change it to something else if you have another directory that you commonly go to. I also like a shortcut key because as much as I use the command prompt, I like to go Start, and then All Programs, and then Accessories, and then Command Prompt. That's kind of cumbersome to do on a regular basis. So I just use a shortcut key of Control-Alt-M, and all I did here was I just pressed the letter M, and by default it affixes Control and Alt to that shortcut. All right. You can also change whether or not it's a normal window, or if you want to change the way the window appears here as well. The other thing that's of particular importance, I think, here would be the Options item, and on this one I choose Quick Edit Mode. That allows me to drag across text in the command prompt window and then copy it into the clipboard. Otherwise, I would have to go to the title bar of the command prompt window and then choose to edit that way. I'll show you about that as well here in just a moment. Also, I think the rest of these kind of explain themselves, but one you might be interested in is the command history buffer size. If you use the arrow keys up and down, if you're at the command prompt quite a lot, you can flip back and forth between any previous items that you have sent in the command history. Okay, so that's just another thing that you could work with there if you want. Now, what's happening here is I've created my shortcut and all that. So if I press Control-Alt-M, watch what happens. Opens me right up to that command prompt in the root of C, and I can just do a dir, for something like that. And if I wanted to then copy and paste with that, because of the fact that I had turned on Quick Edit, notice that I can select all of this, and then if I press Enter, that's how you do that in a command prompt window. You don't press Control-C or something, because look, that'll just give you control. It'll just cancel and send you to the next line in the command prompt window. That's all Control-C does. So you select the text and press Enter to put it into the clipboard, which I can demonstrate to you here by just pasting it into a text document, and we can see that there it all is. Okay. All right. Now, once that's been done, and you have an understanding of that, you also are going to need to know how to navigate your way around the system. Another thing I like to do is to clear the screen. Sometimes if it gets to be a little bit cluttered or distracting, I'll just do a CLS to clear the screen, and that takes me right back to an empty command prompt window. And from here, we need to understand how to create directories. Now, you would think that create directory, the initials would be CD for create directory. That would be wrong. Instead, it's MD for make directory, and then you type in the name of the directory that you want, and it will be created as a child of whatever directory you're in right now. I'm in what we call the root folder right now, or the root of C, meaning that I'm not in any folder. By the way, you can say folder or directory. They are both pretty much synonymous now. Nowadays in Windows, we pretty much call them folders, but since I'm an old guy from way back in the days of DOS, I still call them directories as well. Anyway, I want to make a directory. Let's just call this James. Okay. Now if I do a dir again, we see that I've created that directory, James. There it is. I almost said, where'd it go? There it is, right there. All right. Now if I want to change that directory and maybe create some files or something, I would go to CD James. All right. It's not case sensitive, as you can tell, because I used a lowercase there. Now, if we do a dir here, we see that there's nothing there. But if I want to go ahead and create a file, I can do that as well. Note if I want to go ahead and create a file. Well, I could type in the name of the application that I want to work with the file. So I might do Notepad, for example. And I'll just call this, hello.txt. And it says, we don't find in hello.txt. Do you want to create one? And of course, I'll say yes. And I'll say, hi, everyone. Okay. And then I'm just going to go ahead and exit this and save it. And now when I do a dir again, we'll see that we now have this hello.txt file. What if I say to myself, well, that was kind of a silly file to create. I want to delete it. So I'll do a delete, and then I can do the full name, hello.txt, or if I know that that's the only thing in there that starts with the letter H, I could do an H wildcard.wildcard, okay, like that. Then we would see a dir here, and I would have deleted anything starting with that. Now, you do have to be careful of that, because you might get a little over-aggressive. Maybe there's several files that begin with H in that directory, and I wasn't careful enough to check. Well, now I would have deleted all of them. Okay, so you do have to be a little bit careful and conscious of what you're doing there. So that's how we would use the wildcard characters of the asterisk. And this would mean anything that starts with H and any characters after H. It might just be named h.txt or he.txt or hell.txt. That might not be the best file to use. Or hello.txt, okay? And then on the extension here, again, an asterisk means any characters. Anything from no characters to 100 characters if you want, okay? So it doesn't really matter with an asterisk. It's pretty well addresses any characters there at all. If I wanted to change that a little bit, though, I could have also said delete anything with HE and then question. I can't remember the next two letters, so I'll just do a question O.txt. That would have deleted anything with starting with HE and then any two characters here in the middle where these question marks are, and then an O and .txt. Okay, so that's a little bit more literal than just a wildcard with an asterisk. So anyway, you can, of course, do these same things that I'm showing you here by using a Windows Explorer or My Computer, but sometimes you'll still need to know how to do these sorts of things. One reason why this might be important is because you might want to create a batch file, for example. And that's often used in something like a startup or a logon script or a shutdown script or something like this. I don't think you're really going to need to know about batch files or logon scripts and so forth for A+ exam objectives, but as a career A+ technician, you probably will need to eventually know about those in a practical sense, so I'm just kind of giving you a little bit of a head start on those things as well. Now let's also navigate our way around the file system here as well. So you see here I'm in the James directory. Let me clear the screen here a little bit to give it a little bit less distraction. And what if I wanted to change back to the C drive? Well, I would do a CD for change directory, and then I would do ... or period if I wanted to just go up one directory level, which in this case would be the same as going to the root. What if I wanted to go to, let me change back to CD Windows and then System 32. Notice that if I don't know what the whole rest of it is, but I know what the beginning of it is, I can press Tab, and it will automatically fill in anything that it knows in the Windows directory that starts with SYS. If I press tab again, it'll show me anything else that starts with that. In this case, I think it's only those two, so I can kind of tab both of those without having to actually type them. Now what I want to do is, if I wanted to go back to the root this time, I wouldn't do cd ... and that's a space, cd space, and then period, period. Because that would only take me up one directory level to Windows. Once I had done that, I could repeat that same command, but that would be two commands instead of a single one. It'd be much more efficient if I would just do cd and then /, and now it immediately takes me back to the root directory. So that's kind of how you can navigate your way around the command prompt, and I've probably shown you already more than you have to know for A+ exam objectives, because most people prefer to use the UI now, but again, I think it'll help you anyway for future purposes. And then before I conclude, I also need to show you how to remove a directory. So here I've already created the James directory again, okay? And if we wanted to use the command prompt here to remove it, it's real simple. You just do an RD for remove directory, James. Again, it's not case sensitive. So now if I do a dir again, we don't see a James directory. Now, before I move on too much further, there is a reference on the A+ exam objectives for the telnet command. Again, this is another thing that most people don't use very much anymore. It's not generally considered secure, but we used to be able to use the telnet command to remotely connect to other servers. This is something that could be done in Unix and a number of other file systems as well, in addition to Windows. But again, you can use NT-LAN manager authentication with it, which is a little bit better, but it's just still generally not considered all that secure. Now, here, if we take a look at Windows 2000, I have started the Telnet service on this computer. You can do that if you want to. Let me go to a command prompt here, CMD, and you can do a net start telnet and press enter. Now, I've already done that, so I don't really have any need for completing that for the time being. But I've started that Telnet service. And I've also, in this case, kind of dumbed down authentication just so that we can see this work. And then what I've done is I've just created a directory here. You can see it's called James, and then a file called Places to Go. These are places I want to go someday. You know, Banff in Canada. That's a beautiful mountainous park. I've always seen pictures of it. Always wanted to go. Alaska. You know, I think that'd be great. Ouray, Colorado. I've always heard is wonderful. And then, of course, I'd like to return home. Okay, so now I want to take a look at maybe this file remotely using Telnet. So I would go to, here I just went to XP for sake of variety, I guess, and I'll just Telnet to the IP address of that computer we were just looking at, which was Windows 2000. And that would be 10.10.10.26 in this case. But if you have a way of resolving the name, you could have also typed in the name, okay? And in this case, I just used the IP address. Now, it asked me for credentials. It's a brand new installation where I haven't created any accounts yet, so I didn't create a trainer account. So I'll just log in with the default administrator with a password. Now when I do a dir here, look, there's James. This looks like I'm looking at the file system on the local computer, but if I open it up another command prompt and do a dir, then you'll see there's no James directory on this local file system, okay? But as the title bar indicates, when I telnet to this IP address, which is the Windows 2000 professional computer, and I do a dir over there, then it has that James directory. So if I change, everything I do from the command line here would be the same as if I were seated locally at that Windows 2000 professional computer at this IP address. So if I change to the James directory and do a dir, then again I can see places to go. I could do type places to go.txt, and it would then again show me all the contents of that. So just as an FYI, again, I don't think you'll use Telnet an awful lot, but it is certainly available, and a lot of people, especially that are kind of old-time command line junkies, might prefer to use Telnet in certain instances. And then as we move along with our whiteboard here, I already showed you how to create files and folders from the command line. And I'm going to take a big step here and just assume that you already know how to do that from within Windows Explorer. But just to make sure I cover the base, I'll just go ahead and do this just briefly here anyway. If I'm in the file system, I can create a new folder right here, and I'll just call this, hello, for lack of anything more creative at the time being. That's how I create it, very simple. I could right-click here then and choose a new document of some kind, a text document. Okay, so I'll just create that. And so very simple when you're working with the UI, and I also showed you already how to do that in the command prompt. Now there's another thing you'll need to know about here as well, and that is how to work with various file extensions and attributes. Let's start first of all with the extensions, and for this I'm going to return again to my, Windows Vista computer. Now, first of all, sometimes you want to be able to see file extensions when you would not otherwise be able to see them. So, for example, here I am in the, let me just go to some directory here. Let's go to the James directory again. And if I again create a text document, I'll just call this one projects, projects, just something like that. Now, notice that it gives me the little symbol there for a notepad symbol. And Notepad normally opens items that extend in .txt. However, I don't see a .txt. If I open it, it sure does open up in Notepad. So where in the world is the txt? Well, in reality, it actually is there. If I change directories to James here and do a dir, we'll see that it does indeed have a txt extension on it. The way I can reveal that is if I press the Alt key just briefly, we'll see that we now get menu items up here at the top. Then I'll just choose on Tools, Folder Options, and then I'll go to View. Having gone here then, there's a number of self-explanatory options, but the key thing we want to see here, which I'm going to change for the purposes of this particular nugget, is to show hidden files and folders. That will allow me to see certain things that are otherwise hidden by the file system or the operating system. And then I'll choose to deselect hide extensions for known file types. This means that if there's a known file type, in other words, there's a program that's associated with that file extension, such as a txt, that will automatically open every time you double click on one of those files, then I'm going to hide that it will be hidden normally. But I'll clear that, which actually means it's going to reveal the extension for us, and I'm going to unhide the protected operating system files. And the message you just saw up there warned against that, because now I could expose files to myself that a rudimentary or a novice user might not understand and accidentally delete and cause corruption in the operating system. But now you can see that once I've allowed the extensions, that there they appear. Also, of course, you can change the views. You can do this with a right click, or I can use the views item up here on the toolbar, and I can choose to just view list instead. And that's very often what I'll do, but you can do it however you want. Now, another thing I could do with this is, once again, notice that I double-click on it and it opens up in Notepad, and I just put a little text in there to have something to look at. I could change that by selecting this. Notice that there's an open item up here. If I just click it, once again, it'll open in Notepad. Or I can click this and choose Notepad here. Or, look, WordPad. So by doing this, I can open it up in another application that would potentially be able to read that same text file. Now, if I wanted to change the options, I could choose a default program to always use to open up projects.txt. Maybe if I had Microsoft Word installed, which I don't, but if I did, then that might also appear up here. If it did not, then I would have to browse for it, and I would then have to know that it's located under program files or wherever it might be located. So that, again, is going to be important to know. Where different files are located in program files. So anyway, this is what I could do. I could use this interface to change that default. Alternatively, I could go to Control Panel here, and then I would go to Programs, and then I would go over here to Default Programs, or make a file type always open in a specific program. Okay, that would kind of be a shortcut, but I'll go the long way for the time being. And then this is what the same thing was. The verbiage is different, but it actually does the same thing. Associate a file type or program with a program, okay? So I'll select that item, and then I might say, every time we open, I'll go back down here to txt or something like that, or actually just go to whatever. Every time I see this file here, I want it to open in a different program, and I would change program, and then I would browse for whatever it was that I wanted, and I'd have to find the executable or whatever it was that worked with that specific program. Let's also talk here about the various attributes that could be seen with various files as well. So if I go back here, let's just flip over to Windows XP here. And as I look into this, if I do a dir on the root of the C, notice that I got a few directories there and nothing spectacular to see. But what's kind of weird about that is I turned on the option here in Windows XP so that it would show me hidden and system files. And look, when I double click on the root of C here, I see a few more files. For example, that thing, and that. What in the world's going on here? How come I don't see those when I do a dir over here? The reason for that is because I have to specify, if they're hidden files, for example, I have to specify that I want to see hidden files. So I'll do a dir /a : and then h for hidden files. And now notice that it shows me everything that's hidden from that location, and that's why it will now show me, I think, there it is, boot.ini. All right? Now, what if I decided I didn't want that to be a hidden file for whatever reason anymore? Well, certain system files you might not be able to change the attributes of from within this, but you could do those things. You could change attributes with the attrib command. That's what it's pretty much made for. If you just press Enter, then it will show you some examples here. of files that have specific attributes assigned to them. So for example, A would be archived, S would be system, H would be hidden files. Okay, so we can see what all of those things are. Now if I wanted to remove one of the attributes, for example, let's just say of, I don't know, boot.ini, then I would just do a trib space minus H. Maybe I don't want it to be hidden anymore. But look what happens when I press that right now. It will not allow me to do that to any of these files, okay? Because they are system files. It says not resetting them because they're system files. So another thing I would need to do, actually, and I'm glad it didn't let me do that because I forgot to put in the file name, but I would do a minus H and a minus S. And what else has it got? A minus, it's read-only also, so I could possibly change that as well. But I'm okay with that. So I'm going to subtract the fact that it's hidden and subtract the fact that it's a system file for the boot.ini file. And then now when I do a dir, we'll see that we were able to see the boot.ini file. And if I do a trib again, then we'll see that again the boot.ini file is now an archived, a read-only file. That's it. Now, if I wanted to reverse that, and I really should, because that's not healthy to leave that file in that kind of an unprotected state, then I use my up arrow to repeat the command, and then I'm using my mouse, my arrow keys to go back over here and change the minus to pluses, and then I'll do a trib again, and now we'll see that I've reset it back to the way that it was. So you can use the attrib command to be able to do those things. If you don't want to use the attrib and you still like the command line, or rather the UI, then you can go into the same file, go to its properties. Notice there's read-only there, there's hidden there. So for this particular case, I would have to go to the command prompt. And then here's this where it says file is ready for archiving. That's just kind of a longer way of saying that it has the A bit set, or the archive bit set. Let's take a look here also at where user files can be located. And this would be documents that users normally create. Now, of course, users that know how to browse the file system could probably create and save documents in most any place they want to, unless it's protected by permissions. However, by default, where are these locations? Well, in Windows 2000, which is the most primitive of these, the default of them would be My Documents. Now, although it looks like this folder actually appears on the desktop, it's really not. It's not quite a shortcut, but it's really not in that location. If I choose Properties from the right click, you'll see that the physical location is in Documents and Settings, Administrator, and then My Documents. So that's technically where it's actually located in the file system. If I decide I don't like it there, I could move that to a different location. For example, maybe I have a network server somewhere that I would want to change to My Documents. That way, every time I save documents, they'd get saved on that server and then backed up from the server every night, for example. Or additional local storage as well. Now, if this is kind of grayed out and it shows some path, elsewhere besides the default that you see here, chances are that you're in a corporate domain. And what can happen there is that the administrators can forcibly redirect these files. This is something we call a folder redirection, and that's where administrators want to forcibly take users' files and put them on a file server where, of course, they can back them up every night and run virus scans and so forth. And then the same would be true over on Windows XP, so that if I go to the file system here, you can see there's Trainer's Documents. But again, in reality, that's in the C drive under Documents and Settings, the name of the user, in this case is Trainer, and then, of course, My Documents. Notice if I go back a level, then notice that we also have Shared Documents. Well, where in the world is that located? Again, this one, Documents and Settings, but in this case, All Users, and then Documents. Now, it'd be useful if I had multiple users that use the same computer, and I had some documents that I wanted everybody to be able to see, but others that I wanted only me to see, then I would put them in this location instead. So, once again, on 2000 and XP, it's in Documents and Settings, and then the name of the user. But notice that when we switch over to Vista or to Windows 7, that this is going to change. So that now, when I go to Documents here, I can see certain items right there that appear, but where am I at really in the file system? It doesn't show it up here, but if I just click up here, then notice that it will convert this to the physical file location. So no longer is stuff stored in Documents and Settings, now it's stored under Users. And I kind of like that a lot more, because if you like to work from the command line, it's a lot less typing just to type in Users than Documents and Settings. Plus, certain command line commands would require you to enclose that path in quotation marks, because from a command line, it doesn't always like to see spaces there. It gets confused about that. So you might have to type things in double quotation marks at the beginning and at the end of that command line. So it's a little bit of a frustration for administrators, which is much improved now here under Windows Vista. Let's take a look here at profiles as well, and this relates to everything that the user sees on the desktop, any color scheme changes that they've made, themes they've applied, all those sorts of things will apply to their profile. So if I go here, for example, to Windows XP, notice that as I browse through the file system again in C Drive, Documents and Settings, that for this user, the trainer account, that we do have, a few different things. The start menu, cookies, for example, any internet cookies would be stored there for this user, desktop settings, any favorites that I've created, and then my documents, which we talked about earlier already, okay? Now here, notice that on desktop, it's empty. Likewise here on the desktop, it's empty. That's because the desktop we actually see is part of the file system. So that if I were to right click here and choose a new, text document and say favorite football teams, then notice that that document now actually appears right here. Okay, so this file location is actually this entire desktop. The other thing that relates to my user settings, again, for example, the fact that I use the blue wallpaper in the background, or something that I might have pinned to the start menu, things of this nature, are actually controlled through the registry. So if I type regedit and press enter here, we'll see the registry editor. Now this is quite complex and deep in terms of all the configuration. There's probably tens of thousands of different entries in this whole thing. So of course it is not practical to be able to try to identify all of them. However, settings that relate to this specific user would appear right under HKey current user. So for example, if I were to go under this, and I'm kind of freestyling it here because I'm kind of making this up as I go along out of memory, but control panel and then desktop, then we could go into this and we could see what kind of things we have. So for example, I think it has the wallpaper right here. Okay, there is no wallpaper, right? That's what that's telling me. If I were to change that, I could enter in a file path to a known bitmap, for example, and then I would be able to change that particular setting. So that's just kind of some of the different types of settings that can be configured through the registry. Now, you don't have to memorize this for A+ exam objective purposes. And in fact, you should try to avoid directly editing the registry whenever you can, because most of the things that you can do there can also be done through the interface or through a right click or something like this. And then once again, if you went to Windows Vista, it would be the same in terms of the registry settings that I showed you just now. And it would also be the same in the sense of the file location, except that instead of documents and settings, again, remember it would say users instead. And maybe I better just show that just for clarity's sake. So again, our user profile settings are going to be stored under users, and then the name of the user, and then all of this stuff that we see in here is part of the user profile. Now, since I have hidden and system files revealed here, and operating system files revealed, notice that it also shows me ntuser.dat. Remember when we just looked at the registry back in Windows XP? It actually exposes, when you go to HKey current user, it exposes this file. Okay. In other words, this file is what populates the settings in ntuser.dat. Now, you can't double-click on this and edit it or something like that. You just edit it through regedit, and that's how you expose those settings. Although, once again, it's best if you try to avoid editing the registry editor. Let's also take a look here at system files. And there's not a whole lot to that, but it's pretty obvious for almost any version of Windows. And I'm just going to go into Windows Vista here. If, again, you go to the computer and the C drive, almost always the system files are going to be located here in the Windows directory. And then there's a number of different things that appear here, some of which I'll describe. But some of these are put here by various types of applications or add-ins. Other things are put here by default with Windows. And we'll address some of those here as we come along here shortly. For example, let's start with the first one. That would be fonts. Fonts are, of course, what gives us the typeface setting that you'll see when you type in a Word document or whatever else. In fact, the words that we're looking at right here from within Windows Explorer, that's all revealed to us by a font. The fonts are located right where you see on the C drive under Windows, and then fonts, and that's true across all current versions of Windows right now. One thing that can be interesting, though, is you can take a look at some of these, and I can double-click on it to get a preview of it so I can see what it looks like. Likewise, if I wanted to, I could right-click on it and choose Print if I wanted to print out a sample of this. So, for example, some fonts are more legible than others, and it might be a good way to get a preview of some of those things that you might be able to use. let's also identify where temporary files are. Now, first of all, what are temporary files? These are files that are generally used by some kind of an installation or setup routine, and it has to be able to extract files normally from some kind of a compressed location like a zip file or a cabinet file or some other kind of file like this, and it extracts them into only a temporary location. This is important because it doesn't want to put the files in your normal permanent file locations like your, My Documents or something like that, but it puts it in a temporary location only for purposes of the install. And then good applications should follow that action with a deletion of those same files once the installation process is complete. There are also certain other temporary files that get created when you are working with various applications. Some of them need some kind of like placeholder files or helper files that will assist the application in performing properly and potentially keeping track of changes that you make in files and things like this. Some of the temporary file locations are also useful in recovering data, so that if I'm working with a document and then the power shuts off, well, periodically those applications, such as many of the Microsoft Office applications, may have periodically saved kind of semi-backup locations, if you want to call it that. They're not really complete backups, but they're kind of point-in-time backups of previous states of that same document that I've been working on. That way, when I recover and the power comes back on and I launch Microsoft Word or whatever it is again, then it will identify that I have certain files that were not properly saved and closed. The applications should delete those files when they are properly closed. So for example, going back to Microsoft Word, it creates temporary files while I'm using it, but when I'm done with that file and I save it and I close Microsoft Word, it should clean up after itself and delete those temporary files. Now, where do the temporary files get located? There could be a couple of different locations. One of those would be under the C drive and the Windows directory, and then temp for any system-wide temporary files that have to be created. Other applications, maybe when you run the setup routine, they may create their own temporary file location. It's kind of one of the things that annoys me about some Adobe applications, so that if I download an Adobe application sometimes to my desktop and then I double click on it there, it actually creates the temporary files right on my desktop and then it never cleans them up. So then I have to later on go back and delete those files. The other thing that you might see here, again, is users, and then for each individual user account, such as trainer, you'll see that we also have temporary files here for each one of the users. And that's actually going to be stored in app data. Now this is a hidden folder, okay, but app data, and then we would go to local, and then there's a temp location here, okay. So this is where, for example, when I recently installed the Flash Player update, well, it left behind a bunch of temporary files here, and it didn't really clean up after itself. Now, again, I don't know if I remember mentioning this earlier, but if you are concerned that you're getting a lot of those temporary files left behind, then you can go to a certain utility that will help you with that under Accessories, System Tools, and then it's the Disk Cleanup Wizard. And it's actually done a pretty good job of cleaning up after those types of files. I'm not going to go into program files for the time being because we already addressed that. But remember, for 32-bit operating systems, there's only going to be program files. But if you're working with a 64-bit operating system on 64-bit processors, then you're going to have both program files, and you're going to have the parens x86 for 32-bit applications. So you'll have both of those program files directories on 64-bit Windows. Finally then, let's go ahead and talk here about offline files. Now this is kind of a feature that's really pretty cool, and what this allows us to do is to take network files that we would normally, of course, depend on the network to be able to access, and we can access them even if we don't have access to the network. This is very useful, for example, for laptop users that take their laptops out of the office and have disconnected from the network, but still need to access their company files. Well, they are able to right-click on maybe a file or a folder and choose to make that available offline. At that point, then, the network version of those files will be cached on the local hard drive of that user's computer. Now, I already do that in my case. Let me give you an example here. If I go to my directories here, I got a wallpaper directory, and I got a wallpaper of panoramas here. So I'll just go ahead and look at some large icons. Because I have two monitors, each one of these panoramas spans across two different monitors. Okay, now that might not be necessarily important one way or the other, but you see this would be like the left monitor and this would be the right monitor over here. But if the network connection were to go down, then I would no longer be able to access my beloved wallpaper anymore. So I want to be able to make sure that I can, access these different things here. Now, what I did there then was I went ahead and right-clicked on this folder, and I chose to make this whole thing available offline. So let me go back up here, and if I right-click on this, then I could choose here, always available offline. Now what would happen here is it's going to give me a prompt here that says that it's completed preparing the file so that they're always available offline. And now you'll notice that we get what we call a swirl icon on that. If I change to a larger icon, you can see there that I now have access to those even if I were disconnected from the network. And then what happens with these is, let's say that I was in this folder and I was in Photoshop or something, and I had made edits to, I don't know, this item right here. By the way, this is a glass boat. It's from an artist named Chihuly, and he creates this glass inside of this boat that was at the Desert Botanical Gardens here in Phoenix, and I photographed this. Anyway, let's say I made some changes to this. I added some layers, or I increased the contrast or whatever, and I made changes to it. Well, what would happen if I made those changes while I was out of the office and on my laptop, and then we reconnected when I came back in the office? What happens is Windows, after a certain period of time, and it's kind of a little bit, arbitrary, but it will detect that there have been differences between the local cached copies of the files and the ones that appear on the network. It compares the date-time stamp, and whichever one is newest will overwrite the older one. So if I was working this on my cached copy here on my laptop, then it would copy this and overwrite the network version when I reconnected. If I'm not concerned, and if I'm not convinced, that is, that I have exactly up-to-date files here and that some might still be outstanding changes, I can choose sync and sync offline files in this folder, and it will also do that then in the background as well. And I found that this is actually pretty timely, and I don't very often have to manually sync it. It seems to work pretty well all on its own. And then let me show you where the files are actually stored. If you go to the C drive in the Windows directory, there should be a CSC directory that appears here. And as I double-click on this, you'll see that it won't let me get permission in Windows Vista. In fact, I can click Continue, and then I can click Continue again, but it doesn't actually let you do that. So it's pretty much denied in this case, even though I'm an administrator. And it does that to prevent accidental corruption of the CSC directory. Previous operating systems you could do that with. So for example, if I go over here to Windows XP, I think you'll see that I can get in there. So I'm in the C drive, Windows, and then the CSC folder. Now the CSC folder does not actually appear. Let's address here volume shadow copy. This is a really cool technology used with current backups that will be able to allow you to back up files that are even open. That's why when you use Windows Server 2003 or Windows Server 2008, or if you use Windows Vista's backup technologies, then it's going to go ahead and create backups of files even though you already have them open. Now in older backup technologies, it would have to wait until those files were closed. So if I had a Word document open, for example, then older backup technologies would not be able to back it up because it was locked open. However, volume shadow copy is able to create a point in time of the files I have open and then actually back up that point in time. Then if I needed to restore it at a later point in time, it actually restore that file as it was at the point in time. So it's really cool for current backup technologies, and there are certain third-party backup vendors that also tie into the volume shadow copy service. Now, the volume shadow copy service is actually used in a couple of different ways. One of those is what I just mentioned here for backup technology. The rest of those really all fall behind or below this line right here. This is all a different subject than using backups, all right? So just keep that in mind. So it could be very easily used to restore files and folders. Now you're looking at that and you're saying, wait a minute, James, I thought you said this doesn't have to relate to backup. Yes, that's true. It doesn't have anything to do with the backups like creating a Windows system image or using the backup utilities from within Windows. This is a separate kind of a way of recovering files and folders. Okay, totally different. So maybe I have a file that I accidentally hit the delete key on, and it's not in the recycle bin. Then what am I going to do? Well, normally what we would have to do is to call, a tech support. And I remember from a couple of years back, or a few years back, Microsoft did an internal study on this, so that when users deleted files and they needed them back from the IT department, they would call the first level help desk, and they would have to escalate that call 3 times before they got to somebody with the authority to run a restore from conventional backups. And then by the time they got it back, it would have taken up to 3 days to restore that file. That's way too long for some instances, especially when you have to have that report for a meeting that afternoon or something like this. So it was kind of Microsoft's idea to come up with Volume Shadow Copy because they didn't like how their own restore system worked there. So what happens with this is now if you delete a file, all you have to do is to right-click on the folder that it used to exist in and restore previous versions in the interface. It's very, very simple. I'll show you how to do that here in a moment. Also, maybe you didn't delete it, but you opened the file, and then you made some changes you realized you didn't like, and then you saved it. Oops, now I've overwritten my good file with bad changes. How do I get back the old version? Well, you can restore previous versions, because this will create, depending on the amount of storage space you have, nearly potentially infinite previous versions. You could go back days, weeks, months, years. If you wanted to. So it's very, very effective in restoring previous versions. Now this only really works with XP and Service Pack 2 or greater, Windows Vista, Windows Server 2008, and Windows Server 2003. Actually, I got those backwards, didn't I? Anyway, both of those operating systems. You can also download something called the Previous Versions Client and install it on Windows XP if it does not have Service Pack 2. And you can also download that same client to apply it to Windows 2000 computers. And now let me go ahead and show you how this works. Here, if I go back into some photographs, here's a folder called Moo. Now, that relates to a company called Moo.com that I use to create business cards. And on the back of my business cards for photography, it has a lot of different photographs that I've taken, just by way of example. So let's say that I'm working through all of these files, and I'm working with this file, and I accidentally pressed delete. Okay, so I'm trying to press the arrow key, but I accidentally hit, oops, delete. Now I just deleted that file. Notice that that lightning picture no longer appears in here. Well, how am I going to get that back? All I have to do is to right-click on the folder where the file originally appeared, and then I can go down here to, where is it? Restore previous versions. Okay. Having done that, I can go into one of these items right here. It tells me it was created today at 12 p.m. and also 12 a.m. And I've set this up on my server. This is not something you need to know about for the client side, but on the server side, this has to be configured for network shares. Anyway, it was set up so it creates those backups twice a day, and you can see that it goes back, through several different restore options. So what I would do here is I would simply click Open. And then it would show me the same files here. And I can, again, go back to large icons. Now, there's the lightning picture. So I can right-click on that, choose Copy. And I can just treat this the same way as I would any other file in any other file system. Okay? And then I would go back to the original folder where it was missing from. And I would just right-click here and choose Paste. And there's my lightning picture again. Okay? So very easy way to restore those files. In this nugget, we discussed Windows files, and we started off by talking about the navigation of the file system through the command prompt, which I took a little bit more time with because most people aren't quite as familiar with the command prompt as they are with my computer/Windows Explorer for using the UI. We also took a look here at directory structures, where things such as the user profile can be found, where the Windows directory is, where temporary files are located, and things of this nature. We also addressed offline files. This is where you can have network files that are still available for you even when you're disconnected from the network, and it has a pretty good synchronization mechanism as well to make sure that you are up to date. And then we also looked at the Volume Shadow Copy service, which is an excellent product when it comes to your backup utilities, but also very good for on-the-spot restoration of files that have become corrupt or deleted. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.